Fear Not, Episode 53. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hello, everybody. Today, you and I are going to be joined by Kelly Flanagan. Hello, Kelly, and welcome to the show today.
Hi, Billy. Thanks for having me.
Kelly Flanagan is a licensed clinical psychologist and co-founder of Artisan Clinical Associates in Naperville, Illinois. He is also the author of Lovable, Embracing What is Truest About You so you can truly embrace your life. Kelly, can you take a few moments to fill in the gaps and maybe also give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
Yeah, absolutely. I am, in addition to being a clinical psychologist and author, I'm a husband and a father of three, which, by the way, the three are on spring break this week, so you may hear them in the background. Hopefully that's not going to happen like a BBC interview, but it could. And so they are 13, 9, and 7, and I live in north central Illinois with them, and I commute to my practice in Naperville 2 days a week. I've been blogging now for about 6 years, and my first traditionally published book comes out today, so I'm super excited.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Kelly, can we start off today by having you help us to understand what fear is?
Yeah, absolutely. The understanding of fear in my profession as a psychologist has shifted dramatically just really in the last decade. When you go back to, say, the early 70s, there was a huge focus on what we call the cognitive behavioral tradition. And in that tradition, the idea was essentially that fear and anxiety are bad, and they need to be eliminated. And the way to eliminate them is to correct the sort of faulty thinking that is leading to the fear. So there's a lot of focus on correcting irrational thoughts and ideas and beliefs. That understanding, empirical studies show that understanding of fear led to some improvement for a small subset of people. But even those people over time would sort of regress and begin to experience higher and higher levels of fear and anxiety again. So we've sort of shifted away as psychologists from that strict cognitive behavioral approach. And over, I'd say, maybe the last decade or two, psychological theory in the West has really been influenced by Eastern ideas having to do with mindfulness and meditation and these kinds of things. And in these traditions, you don't think of fear as something that is strictly bad. You think of fear as something that is a normal part of life. And so in that sense, the focus is not so much on overcoming our fear completely and eliminating it, but learning how to become present to it. So you sort of acknowledge that life is, naturally going to contain fear. And then the focus is on choosing to live the things that you value really in the midst of your fear, rather than waiting to live until your fear is overcome. So this is the view that really psychologists in general are adopting, and one that's really started to infuse my own clinical work in my life.
So if we don't completely overcome fear, what do we do? I mean, how do we shift?
Right.
How do we approach it then?
Right. Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes of all time is by Abraham Lincoln when he was asked, how do you destroy your enemies? And his response was, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? And so part of the idea here is that we, paradoxically, we overcome our fear by gradually learning how to befriend it. And initially that sounds crazy. But really, when you think about fear as the impulse to avoid something, then when we begin to reverse that impulse and learn how to approach it and welcome it along for the ride, we've truly started to overcome it without eliminating it. And so that's more the focus that we take these days in terms of overcoming our fear. If it's okay, I'd like to share a story. I'll try to make it quick. I had a reader who's become sort of a good friend through my blog email me and tell me a story recently. He said, I was up on, he's a pastor, he says, up on the pulpit, getting ready to deliver my weekly sermon. And I looked out in the congregation and I saw, it was like the district superintendent or something like that. He said, I instantly started to have a panic attack, because when the district superintendent shows up and doesn't announce himself, it's usually because there's an evaluative component to it. He said, I noticed something though in that moment. I wasn't feeling the anxiety of an adult. I was feeling like the fear of a little kid. And I've been doing this work on myself. And so what I did in that moment was I said to myself, started talking to the little boy in me, who I know still exists inside of me. And I said, hey, buddy, I got this. I know how to give a good sermon. I'm skilled at this. I can do this. So you don't need to be afraid. But I do need you up there with me. I need you up there with me because you're the playful part of me. You're the creative part of me. You're the funny part of me. I need you to come on up there and talk with me. And he said in doing so, he sort of invited this fearful kid inside of him, right, up onto the podium with him. And together they gave a great sermon. And I thought such a great illustration of truly inviting our fear along for the ride and welcoming it in. So I love that story.
But aren't there some form of extreme examples of fear that need to be solved?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's true. If you think of, for instance, that sadness is a normal part of life, but depression is an extreme form of sadness that needs to be dealt with. In a way, I think you could say that while fear is a normal part of life, then some forms of anxiety are extreme forms of fear that also need to be treated. So sometimes that takes the shape of panic disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. And these are kinds of anxieties that cripple us and make it difficult to live life. And those definitely do need to be treated with medication or psychotherapy and so on. But what's interesting is that once you sort of start digging into those disorders, usually you'll discover that at least a part of the intensity of the fear was an initial reaction to the normal fear of life that said, I can't feel this. I can't have this fear. It's wrong to be afraid. I need to get beyond this. I need to eliminate it. And so again, even in those treatments of more what we'd call disordered types of fears, there's this work done to learn how to not eliminate the fear altogether, but learn to live with the normal fears of life.
So could you maybe give us an example of what it would look like to approach fear this way, and instead of just outrighting avoiding it?
Yeah. So one of the metaphors that I often use with clients, and one of the metaphors that I illustrate in my book, it sort of occurred to me. We go to the beach every year, my wife and our kids, for our summer vacation back to my wife's home in Delaware. And I was on the beach here a couple of years ago, and we were sort of wading in the waves with the kids. And my middle son was in the waves really for the first time. He was finally old enough to get out there, knew how to swim. And this big wave, I don't know if you've ever been in the ocean, but you can kind of see it coming at you, and it's starting to crest. And the impulse is either to kind of freeze and be scared and stand stock still, or to turn around and run for the shore. But the experienced swimmer in the ocean knows that if you do either one of those, the wave's either going to crash down on top of you, or you're going to get hit in the back and actually shoved forward into the rocks. So I found myself saying to my son, hey, we got to jump into it. We have to move towards it. We have to kind of slice through the wave before it crests. And this is one of the metaphors that I often use in my clinical work is, what would it look like to move towards this fear, to dive through it, and come up the other side, not having been beaten up by it? And so there are a number of different ways that can look in life and play out. But that metaphor to me is really critical. So I'll give you an example that I've been going through over the last month personally, and even today. I guess it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I found my anxiety about this upcoming book launch, my first book, sort of starting to crescendo and really getting in the way of me being able to um, to live effectively, I guess. And I said that I found myself saying to my wife one day, I said, "Man, it's my first book launch. How many times do you get to be a first-time author? I just want to enjoy this. I don't want to be so anxious and scared. I just don't want this to be the experience." And in her wisdom, she looked back at me and she said, "I don't think there's any way to release a book without feeling vulnerable." and and so immediately there was permission for the fear to be present. So immediately that started to reduce my resistance to the fear. Then the question is, how do I approach it? And I asked her that. I said, okay, great. So I'm not going to eliminate the vulnerability, but what else? What can I do? And her response was, you got into writing after practicing gratitude for a year. What if you just practice gratitude over the next several weeks? What if you just reminded yourself that fear and vulnerability can sit right next to joy and gratitude in life, and move towards the things that you're grateful for, and move towards the things that you value. And so another way of thinking of this isn't that I move towards fear. It's I'm moving towards the thing that I value, which happens to be on the other side of my fear. And I just have to go through this fear to get there. And that's why it's so important to approach fear. Because if we wait for fear to sort of be extracted and moved out of the way as a barrier to living the lives that we want to live, we'll never get started. We have to start living towards those things and move through the fear in the process. And so that's something that I've had to practice here in the last month. And I think it's something that it's why identifying our values and our goals and our passions and the things that we want to do in life is so important to healing and to health, because those are the things that we move towards. And in fact, that's sort of how I would define courage. Courage isn't necessarily the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to move in the directions of the things that you love, despite fear being in the way. And as you get more and more confident that you can do that, and you understand better and better how to do that in your life, then your fear starts to diminish, because you say, okay, when I start to get a little bit afraid of this, I know how to handle it. I can move through it. I have confidence in myself. And that's how that starts to have a positive snowball effect over time.
So is that what it looks like for us to live beyond fear? Is that sort of the model?
Again, I think, living beyond fear is living with the natural fears of life, but without the fear that we can't handle them. So in other words, as you live beyond fear and move beyond that first wave, again, if you've been in the ocean, you notice that you're sort of bobbing out in the waves. So the fear is still kind of rolling in, but it's not stopping you. It's not crashing down upon you. And I think in life, what that means is that we have kind of developed a sense of confidence and resilience that in the face of fear, we can continue to live the way we want to live. It's not going to stop us from doing that.
Kayla, I've also heard the wave is not exactly the first time I've ever heard that metaphor, if you will, on how to approach fear. I've heard, ride the wave. It's always sort of just to get up and over. You're talking about going through. Do you think that's pretty much all the same thing? It's just it's not turning around the other direction. It's just embracing it, acknowledging it, but not giving in to it.
Yeah, I think increasingly that's what we're aware of as human beings. Fear is built into us for a reason. Evolutionarily, we need it as human beings. You see kids who are sort of fearless and you cringe because they put themselves in great danger. So fear is actually a part of wisdom in developing a wise and healthy kind of source of decision making. So we need it as a part of our life. And so when we feel like we have to run away from our fear or feel like we have to eliminate it, that's where we start to get into trouble. We lose a great source of information. And so, I think all of those ideas, whether you're talking about riding the wave or watching the wave is another one people will describe, or diving into that wave of fear, you're getting at the same idea, which is this sort of revolution in human thinking that, oh, wait, even though it doesn't feel very good, even though it's uncomfortable, we need this, and we need to be able to be present to it. I think we're all kind of coming at that. It's a good metaphor, and we're all coming at it from a different angle.
Could you also possibly give us an example of, you know, beyond the metaphor, but, a real life practical application when a
Sure.
situation comes up that's fearful that we can recognize and analyze? And I mean, because there are two types of fear. There's the one where you really do need to flee. uh,
Right. Exactly.
yeah, but then
Exactly.
there's just that fear that keeps us from reaching our dreams. So maybe you
Yes.
can help us to figure out the difference
Yes.
between the two and what we can do so that we don't live in fear and that we can actually pursue
Yeah.
our dreams.
It's a great question. So one of the really the core premise um, of my book Lovable is the idea that um, at the root of our inability to live the lives we want to live and to pursue the things we're passionate about is a fundamental fear that we're not good enough. Okay, so you're right. We have these very real fears in life, right? When the house catches on fire, you better run out of it. But we also have these fears that do arise from this this belief um, that starts to develop at a very early age before we even realize it's sort of taken root in us. This belief that I'm not good enough, that what is inside of me isn't worthy, and I need to go out into the world and prove my worth or earn my worth or do something to prove that I'm worthwhile. Um, and it puts too much pressure on the things that we do in life. It puts too much pressure on our performance. It makes everything sort of a life and death feeling kind of endeavor. And so when I work with my clients and someone comes in and says, I've always wanted to write this book or start this business or adopt this child, or before we really delve in to those questions of passion and pursuit, we first take a step back and we say, let's address the fundamental fearful belief underneath the surface that you're not good enough, so we can take the pressure off of that thing you want to do, and it can remain something you love doing rather than something you feel like you have to do to prove yourself. Um, and and so that fear, I believe, is at the core of what gets in the way of so much that we do. And again, we have to move towards that fear and that belief, which I call shame, and begin to relearn it so that we can feel free to go out and do the things we want to do.
So, what do you do to help someone
Mm-hmm.
relearn that and to move beyond the shame and the thoughts of not being worthy enough or good enough?
my first, yeah, my first answer is I don't know, because it's a little different for everybody, and can be um, it's I know that everyone is capable of it, and I know that everyone can do it. But every path is a little bit different. So I think it's important to say that there's no six simple steps. But I will say, if you want to boil it down to its simplest form, it involves, first of all, becoming aware of that voice that's constantly playing in our heads. I call it the voice of shame, that says you're not good enough, you're not interesting enough, you're not smart enough, you're not talented enough, you're not tall enough, and so on and so forth. Now, typically we experience that voice as um, sort of the narrator of our life, telling us about life the way it is, as if it's a fact, because it started so early that we've never really paid attention to a different voice within us. So the first step is starting to become aware of and observing that voice of shame, and gradually beginning to get a sense of differentiation from it, so that we can say, oh, that's not me talking, that's my shame talking, and now I am me, and I can listen to that voice within me, and I can start to make decisions about what I want to do with it. Do I let it dictate my decisions and behaviors, or do I say, the fear that's creating in me isn't real, and I need to move through that and beyond that? And then almost invariably, the next step, once someone has been able to get really good at listening to that voice of shame, one of the things that we'll do next is I'll encourage them to start to listen to a different voice within them, one that they have not listened to, because shame is usually so loud inside of us. It's a voice that I call the voice of grace, but it is the voice inside of them that knows they are worthy, that knows that they don't have anything to prove, that knows that the game is sort of over, and now they can just go out into the world, let people know who they are, and enjoy their people as their people enjoy them, and do the things that they love to do. And so that attending to the voice of shame and then listening to a new voice within us is a very critical process in all that process of healing.
Kelly, if someone would like to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, my blog is probably the best way to do that. It's at drkellyflanagan.com. It's drkellyflanagan.com. And when you go to my blog, there's a place in the upper right column to subscribe to my weekly blog post, which comes out every Wednesday at 5. And when you subscribe to that blog post, you'll get a sample of my new book for free. You'll also get a copy of my short ebook, The Marriage Manifesto, for free. And so that's a good way to start getting connected on a weekly basis and receiving my emails with my weekly blog post.
Great. And what parting advice would you like to leave with us today?
Don't wait, I guess, is the best advice I could give. We have this fear that we are going to do something wrong that is going to mess up our lives. But I have seen far more lives diminished by waiting to live rather than living wrongly. So my encouragement would be, don't wait for the fear to go away, to start doing the things that you want to do with your life and to start loving the people you want to love. I would say begin identifying what those things are and who those people are, and begin moving towards them. And if you need a little help with it, just come ask. We're here. We'll help out. We're glad to do so.
Great, and thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to also let everyone know, too, that Kelly has generously donated a copy of his new book, Lovable, which we'll be giving away. So if you would like the opportunity to win a copy of that book, visit the giveaways page at livingbeyondyourfears.com and submit your free entry form today. The contest is only 7 days, and there are multiple ways for you to enter, so don't forget to enter today. Kelly, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and being so generous with your time and knowledge today, and just really helping us to reframe our thoughts of fear.
Absolutely. I'm still honored to be here, and I just think that the work that you're doing, this is critical stuff for us as human beings, and I'm so grateful that you're out there doing this kind of work as well.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.